What's interesting about Quarkus and why Quarkus was started is not necessarily to kill Spring. It was way more about what is the future of Java. There was adoption of cloud, of serverless. We were seeing that actually Java was losing a little bit of its relevance. I worked on Spring Boot for many years too, and when I first started playing around with Quarkus back in 2019, it was already that aha moment of, wow, this is such a nicer experience to develop with. A little bit of a misconception that we often hear is people, well, I don't necessarily need native compilation, so then I shouldn't use Quarkus. And it's like, no, Quarkus works great on the JVM.
Hey folks, and welcome to a new episode of the Marco Show. Today, the topic is growing Quarkus in a Spring Boot world. And I have an exciting guest exactly for that topic for us here in Munich. Hi.
Hello.
Who are you?
I'm Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah, we joked earlier about introductions, but
yep.
So I'm Kevin Dubois. I'm currently living in Switzerland, originally from Belgium. I also live in Italy, in the United States. Right. But I work at IBM now. We moved from Red Hat to IBM. Well, a part of our department, or our entire department even, in July. So it's a little bit new, but I'm already wearing blue stuff. So
right. Okay.
I'm being assimilated.
Yeah. And what's your involvement with Quarkus for people who don't know, Red Hat, IBM, and that stuff?
Yeah, so I'm a developer advocate, and so that means that I work closely with Quarkus engineers to kind of, in a way, promote Quarkus, but really our goal is to, from a developer advocacy standpoint, is to make developers happy, of course. We try to figure out, how do we work with Quarkus and make it as awesome as possible for developers to use. And then, of course, from an organizational standpoint, also make sure that it fits the needs of modern development in the world. So, I mean, it's a little bit of everything, right? So we go and speak at conferences, we write articles, books, contribute back to the Quarkus project, and we work really closely with the engineers to kind of bring the feedback back to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Then actually, let's jump right in. I mean, from your perspective, how do you actually see Spring Boot's dominance in the current Java world? And just saying, I don't have specific numbers, but I guess the majority probably is going to be using Spring Boot nowadays. How do you see that from a Quarkus perspective?
Yeah. So, obviously, Spring Boot is by far in the Java world, at least, has the biggest adoption. But it's really interesting to see from our perspective, from the Quarkus perspective, that I think especially the last year, 2 years, but especially the last year, we've been seeing a lot of adoption of Quarkus coming over from the Spring Boot world, which for us, of course, is nice. Is nice. But what we're seeing is that especially newer developers that don't have that legacy of working with Spring, they really kind of jump on Quarkus. But we're also starting to see the more kind of senior developers that are used to Spring also kind of start to dabble in Quarkus. Right. So yeah, it's interesting to see how that's evolving.
Was there anything specific happening in the last 1 or 2 years? I mean, just from the product perspective, so to say?
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily one kind of killer feature. I mean, there's many killer features in my opinion, but I think it's more as Quarkus is maturing and it's been around for longer, people have been hearing about it more and also seeing more and more cases of adoption of Quarkus. So we're seeing that there's large organizations that are starting to use Quarkus. There's government institutions that are starting to use Quarkus. And I think it's also that they see like, if, let's say, in quotes, serious organizations are using Quarkus, then maybe this is something that we need to seriously consider. And it's not just, kind of this toy project, let's say.
Yeah. Just as a step back, maybe some history for people who don't know. When was Quarkus roughly created?
So it was created around 2019. Yeah. So it's been around for, I guess, what are we now? 2025.
Yeah,
so
25, yeah.
That's like,
was there any specific frustration that the Quarkus founders had back in the day, and they said, well, Spring Boot is not it, we need to do something else? Or what led to the creation of Quarkus actually?
So here's kind of what's interesting about Quarkus and why Quarkus was started is not necessarily to kill Spring. It was way more about Java and what is the future of Java, because there was adoption of cloud, of serverless, and we were seeing that actually Java was losing a little bit of its relevance compared to some other languages that had faster startup time and had better memory and CPU usage in cloud environments. And so in Red Hat at the time, they're like, how can we make sure that Java stays relevant? Because there's a fair amount of revenue from Java. Also, there's that part. And that's kind of how that got started. So it wasn't necessarily to compete against Spring. It was more compete against other languages and keep Java relevant. So that's maybe
right, interesting. I didn't know.
A surprising little fact. But.
And has that, though, changed kind of? I mean, over the years, because obviously there is, I mean, Spring Boot has also been, I guess, now trying to cater to that space kind of over the last couple of years. Would you say nowadays, you know, you might not be trying to kill Spring Boot, but is there still a specific niche where you say, hey, this is the niche where we really think we still have nailed it? We're actually trying to replace Spring Boot in that niche?
Yeah, so I think over the last 6 years, there's been kind of more of an evolution towards within the Java world and starting to compete against Spring. So, I mean, that's definitely more so in the last few years, the top concern versus we need to keep Java relevant, because I think in that regard, I think we've kind of nailed it in terms of there's lots of organizations that are using Java in the cloud now, even with serverless. And I think 6 years ago, that wasn't so much the case. I mean, there were possibilities, but it was more like we're going to just lift and shift these big environments into a container and then use these big kind of cloud environments. Now we're seeing, you know, even Spring Boot has followed that trend, of course, to get smaller workloads in the cloud. And so we've kind of seen a shift towards, well, actually, Quarkus is a really cool stack. We've invested a lot into the developer experience and making it fun to work with Java as well, which traditionally maybe people were like, oh, working with Java, there's so much verbosity, and then it starts up really slow, and to work on your local machine is sometimes annoying. And so with Quarkus, of course I'm biased, but with Quarkus, you can really see that it's a lot more fun, but it starts up fast. You have that quick feedback loop, and you have this Quarkus dev mode, which is super cool, that you get all these insights.
We'll actually get into that in a second, yeah.
Yeah, and then we've seen that Spring Boot developers have started kind of trickling into the Quarkus ecosystem. And at this point, it's why not? I mean, again, very biased, but I worked on Spring Boot for many years too. And when I first started playing around with Quarkus back in 2019, it was already that aha moment of, wow, this is such a nicer experience to develop with. It kind of reminded me, I worked with PHP and Python back in the day too, and having that kind of quick feedback loop of you just make a change, you refresh your browser or your script, and it's already there. Like, that's so nice.
By the way, I still get warm feelings from, you know, FTPing a PHP file onto a server, and it just works. You know, there's nothing else you have to do. It's just, you know, immediately updated.
Right.
Out of interest, how many people are working on Quarkus altogether? How many engineers? And what does your release cadence look like? I mean, do you have regular releases where you say, hey, there are a couple of killer features coming on a regular cadence throughout a year?
Yeah, so I don't know how many people are working on Quarkus, because, of course, it's an open source project. So there's a lot of contributions coming from all over. The Quarkus core team is probably not that big. I can't put an exact number on it, but it's not super big because there's just a lot of contributions in general.
Right.
Yeah.
And as for releases, do you have like a major release every year? Or?
Yeah. So there's not a set. Quarkus 3 comes out this year, a few years ago, and Quarkus 4 is going to come out maybe next year. We don't know yet, but there's not like a specific cadence. There is more of a cadence of the point releases or the smaller releases. So usually it's, I think, every other Thursday there's a point release.
You have a point release, okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so but overall it's people are working on features, and as soon as they're ready, we'll push those up to upstream Quarkus projects and then kind of see how everything is going. And then Red Hat right now, and then IBM will also have an IBM build of Quarkus. So there's a supported version. And so those versions are, of course, on, I think, on a 6-month basis that they get released. And then there's LTS releases within the community Quarkus project as well.
Right.
But again, I don't know exactly what the cadence of those is.
Do you, by the way, because I guess what makes Spring so enticing and so popular is that also it has integrations and workflows for everything out there. I mean, for every corner case there is, and when I look at Spring Security, for example, I probably have to study for 5 PhDs to fully grasp it because it supports everything and anything. And I guess Quarkus philosophy can't be exactly that. I mean, you cannot possibly support all of this, essentially. Is the philosophy in general kind of, just making sure that, I don't know, much smaller use cases are working, or are you actually trying to replicate any integration that, for example, the Spring universe also has?
I think it's more the latter. One of the concerns for people to adopt Quarkus in the past was like, oh, their ecosystem isn't as big as Spring, and it doesn't support these specific use cases that I have, or there were concerns about the documentation isn't as elaborate as Spring, and that kind of still lingers around. But I think Quarkus has come a long way over the last few years. I think the documentation is really good, and the ecosystem has grown a lot. We've seen so many contributions. The nice thing with Quarkus is you have the Quarkus core, and then you have the Quarkiverse. And in the Quarkiverse, people can contribute extensions. And there's a nice prescriptive way of how you can create an extension for Quarkus. And so it makes it really nice and easy to integrate all these pieces into Quarkus without necessarily affecting the core of Quarkus. So
right.
I think that whole ecosystem works really well.
Quarkiverse. Okay.
Yeah, the Quarkiverse.
I learned something new. Okay, the Quarkiverse. Now, you already started mentioning it. So when people then try out Quarkus for the first time, they might be surprised that actually it is, I mean, you have nailed a couple of things when it comes to the developer experience. One of these things is what I noticed, obviously, the hot reload and fast reload. Would you actually be able to tell us a bit what happens during build time that you can pull this off because it works across the entire system? So even if I'm not mistaken, doesn't matter if it's Hibernate or whatever, you can just, almost PHP the whole thing. I mean, you just, recompile and everything just works, which is kind of surprising or might be surprising to people coming from a Spring Boot world. There are dev tools, obviously, but it's not quite the same somehow. So what is happening at build time? What magic, what black magic is Quarkus pulling off?
That's a good question. So I don't know exactly what happens from a pure technical perspective, because to me it's a little bit magic too. But the thing is, the Quarkus team really thought of this from the get-go is how can we make sure that this has a really nice developer experience, especially for cloud environments, but also on the local machine. How can we make that really kind of solid? And because they wanted to work on making sure the application starts up fast for cloud environments and use less memory, there's been a lot of work on that kind of the build phase and optimization of not just kind of the ahead of time compilation, but the build time optimization. They do dead code elimination, all that stuff kind of ahead of time, which makes it a lot faster to start up. And that's really kind of the magic of we're able to then use that hot reload because it's so fast to start up that we can just, every time there's a change and you refresh your browser, it just kind of reloads almost the entire application.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of magic things happening there to make that work. But yeah, I don't know exactly the details.
Does it come at the expense though that build times or whatever are then longer as opposed to
when you're developing? Slightly, but I think it's pretty much the same. So if you just compile your application to run on the JVM, it's going to be
same thing,
very much the same. Now, of course, then if you want to do a native compilation, but that's a different story.
Sure, yeah. We've had the hot reload. I think also from what I saw is I don't know what you call it, the dev UI, I guess. Could you tell people a bit about what happens in the dev UI?
Yeah. So when you run Quarkus in the dev mode, it also starts up this dev UI. Optionally, you can also turn it off. But I really love that feature because you can open it in your browser and you get a lot of information about your Quarkus application, about the extensions that are running in there. And that's a really cool feature about Quarkus is when you create an extension, it's basically just a dependency, or let's say Hibernate or LangChain4j or whatever you want to add to your Quarkus application. But these extensions aren't just a dependency. They also have an integration into the dev mode where it potentially can start up a dev service, which is kind of using test containers or some other feature. Most of them use test containers. And when you use the dev UI, it's going to show you, oh, you're using these kinds of dev services, you're using these kinds of extensions, and then this extension, for example, has some features. So for example, with Hibernate, you can see in the dev UI what kind of tables you're using. You can even go look at the tables. If you're using a Kafka extension, you can see what Kafka topics there are. You can even go look and see what kind of messages are in that topic if you're running it in the dev mode. There's a lot of different features in that dev UI, but you get so much feedback back that it's super cool. With AI, of course, there's a more fascinating feature, part of that dev mode, which exposes the dev mode as an MCP server. And so now if you're working with a code assistant, you can actually add that MCP server to your code assistant. So you don't only get the context of the files that you have in your IDE, you also get all the information about the Quarkus runtime in real time coming from that MCP server. So that's a really cool feature.
That is quite nice.
Yeah. And so you can enable that in the dev UI because by default, of course, you need to start it, and then you can enable which kind of information is available to your application as well. So you can say, I want these tools and these tools, but maybe that tool.
Interesting. Are there any other big, like for example, hot reload now and the dev UI, any other big topics where you say this is what we really try to nail and when it comes to developer experience?
I want to say yes. I think in terms of cloud development, I think it's really nice too. So when you add, for example, Kubernetes extension to your Quarkus application, so by default, it's going to generate Kubernetes YAMLs for you. So you can build your container from Quarkus by just doing, if you're using a Quarkus CLI, you can do Quarkus image build, and it's going to create a container for you. If you do Quarkus deploy and you are connected to a Kubernetes instance, it's going to even deploy your container to a Kubernetes environment. Now, not necessarily that Quarkus is only for cloud environments, right? Because you can use Quarkus as a completely traditional Java application. That's sometimes a misconception that I hear as well, where folks are like, okay, but I'm not using containers, so then I shouldn't use Quarkus. Absolutely, yes, you should. But if you are using containers in the cloud environment, then Quarkus has some really cool features to make that super easy. That's one of the talks that I really like to show because it's like, wow.
Right, yeah. Another topic you've already mentioned was ahead of time compilation, GraalVM. And I think Quarkus, I guess, was, at least from what I saw in the past, kind of not betting on it, but I mean, placing some emphasis on the whole topic. What's the actual real world experience that you're getting? Are people actually using ahead of time compile Quarkus a lot in production? Are there any experience reports? I mean, or do people still go the JIT route at the end of the day?
Yeah, so there are use cases of people using Quarkus in native mode. When people are using native compilation, we like to tell people use it when you need it, but don't feel like you have to use it just because you get some gains in terms of startup time and memory and CPU usage, because it does add a little bit of complexity to your application. You don't have the same, right? And again, a little bit of a misconception that we often hear is people, well, I don't necessarily need native compilation, so then I shouldn't use Quarkus. And it's like, no, Quarkus works great on the JVM and already has a lot of optimization because it does so much during the build time that even on the JVM, you get huge gains compared to some of the other stacks. So please, if you don't need the native compilation, and then of course, if you do, that's great because it's super easy with Quarkus, because it does have already a lot of optimization, which means that your native compilation is going to be faster than if you're using the other stacks. But to answer your question, there are use cases out there, and the return of experience is that it works great for if they really need it. But yeah, it does add some complexity too, if you need to debug and everything. Of course, the GraalVM team might not necessarily want me to say that, but I mean, and GraalVM is great, right? It has definitely answers a need for specific use cases, but I would say don't use it necessarely just because you want
have
that.
to use it. Yeah, I haven't deployed a native production image application. In a long time. I'm just trying it out. Once in a while, every couple of months. I still find it to be a bit finicky, really, to get the build process really up and running and have a very smooth experience. And I was just really interested in what the real world experience actually is of how many people really use it, because I think at the end of the day, the whole JIT world, I guess, is just still more convenient. Let's put it like that. Yeah, I mean, for companies.
And I think it will continue to be. I think with a lot of improvements in the OpenJDK project too, with Project Leiden and stuff like that. I think the JVM is definitely relevant because, especially if you have long-running processes that aren't these tiny little serverless or small cloud applications that run for a short amount of time, in that case, definitely the native compilation might be a good answer. But if you have longer running processes, the JVM is able to optimize a lot more along the way than the natively compiled applications that have the great startup time, but then they kind of stay the same throughout, whereas the JVM is able to kind of optimize the throughput more and more.
By the way, just a shameless plug, I'm currently working through the 1 billion road challenge with Casey Moratori on my Marco Codes channel. It's probably going to take us another 50,000 episodes because we're really trying to dig deep into even the assembly language. And I was just thinking of the topic because, of the whole JIT versus AOT and whatever. If you'd like us to talk more about that, please watch these videos. Let us know what you think. But it's a fascinating story to get into the JVM details of what native code is being produced at the end of the day.
Yeah, interesting.
Which brings us to a different topic. A colleague of mine asked me actually to ask you, so I'm just delegating this. MicroProfile, Quarkus and MicroProfile. Just briefly, what is MicroProfile for people who don't know what MicroProfile is?
Yeah, so it's a set of specifications, also kind of similar to why Quarkus was started to answer this kind of cloud native world with microservices, and a set of specifications. It's a collaboration between different organizations to have a common set of specs for example, exposing health endpoints or how to do observability or fault tolerance, and those kinds of things. So we in the Quarkus world, we try to work with common specs as much as possible. So with Jakarta EE, with MicroProfile, Yeah, so you see those implementations in Quarkus, for example. We have the name is escaping me right now. SmallRye as the implementation of MicroProfile.
Right.
So you'll see Quarkus SmallRye Health and Quarkus SmallRye this and that, and those are the implementations of the MicroProfile spec within Quarkus. So you can, for example, by adding Quarkus SmallRye Health, you add behind the scenes is going to add health endpoints to your application for running in a Kubernetes environment. So you as a developer don't need to create all the kind of health endpoints. And then with that Kubernetes extension that I was talking about before, adds those startup probes and liveness probes to your Kubernetes YAML as well, pointing to those health endpoints as an example.
Right, yeah. The cheeky question I got is regarding MicroProfile and Quarkus. Does MicroProfile actually help Quarkus, or does Quarkus help MicroProfile stay alive, so to exist?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a few other stacks at IBM that also work closely with the MicroProfile spec. So that's a good question. Of course, Quarkus, I think it's safe to say that together with Spring, they're kind of the two biggest stacks in the Java world these days. So you could maybe argue that Quarkus helps keep MicroProfile relevant, but I think it's really good that there are common specifications like that. And I kind of wish that Spring would jump more on board with common specs across the board. I think that only benefits the entire ecosystem, right?
Is there actually other talks going on between the teams, the Quarkus World and Spring Boot teams, sometimes on topics, on these sort of topics?
It's a good question. There are occasionally some impromptu conversations at conferences, but as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but as far as I know, not too much, which I think is a little unfortunate.
When it comes to applications, we've already talked about, I mean, you've mentioned it, saying that, hey, Quarkus is not just for the Kubernetes world. I mean, you can use it for anything else also. What's your take currently, looking at the entire Java landscape? I mean, monoliths, microservices, monoliths, serverless. What do you actually see people using out there? What do you think where the current Java ecosystem in total stands on that entire topic?
Yeah, I think there's a use case for each one of those. I think a lot of organizations have or are moving to cloud environments just because it's more available and it's easier. But there are definitely use cases where that's not needed. And I would say, then in that case, keep using your stack that maybe use Quarkus, but create a monolith or create a monolith with Quarkus. You're gonna get a lot of the benefits from Quarkus, but don't just use microservices because you feel like you have to. Microservices definitely add an overhead to the complexity of your applications.
Operations,
and you have multiple components that you then need to orchestrate. And if you don't need that, then, I mean, you're just creating complexity for the sake of complexity, which makes no sense, right?
So that means you could even suggest people, or not could, but I mean, we would suggest them, you build something new, start out small. You don't have to go native immediately. You can use Quarkus along the way. You should run it on one machine and see what happens. And then maybe later on, if you need to scale, then you can always, evolve into, scaling the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's for any stack, right? I mean, not just Quarkus. I think if you end up needing more components and you have different teams that work on different pieces and you want to work on them individually and orchestrate them into different containers, by all means, there's lots of use cases for that. Doing it just for the sake of it, no, it doesn't make sense.
Unfortunately, from my and we've briefly talked about consulting, our consulting experience in the past, it often turns into doing some things for the, just for the sake of. And then you suddenly look around and you have 100 microservices where you shouldn't really be having them in the first place. And but it just kind of, it kind of happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then why not do them serverless too, and then have the complexity of that too,
Yep.
of course.
Yep, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Just in general, because we've said it doesn't really matter, start small, with your monolith, with a maybe JIT JVM. What do you think in general, where is Java heading currently? Where is the entire field of Java heading at the moment? Maybe also then where is Quarkus heading, or where do you think the entire field is going to be heading in 5 years? But let's start with Java.
I think right now one of the big concerns of Java is to staying relevant in the AI world. And so we see that throughout the Java industry, that there's a lot of projects that kind of try to address different aspects of how to work with AI. Should Java be used for data science and machine learning, or should Java just be relevant for integrating the AI models into your code? And so I think for the latter, for sure, there's definitely a place for Java, right? There's a lot of Java projects, enterprise Java applications where it could be interesting to infuse AI into the application. And I think, again, biased, of course, but Quarkus is doing a really good job with integrating with LangChain4j and with creating different features with like an MCP server and all that stuff. On the machine learning and the training model side, there it's maybe a little bit more questionable. What's the relevancy of Java there? And I struggle with that a little bit myself, because on the one hand, we want to stay relevant throughout, but maybe on that side, projects like Python or languages like Python make more sense because it's more experimentation, changing things on the fly, and you don't need necessarily the ecosystem of Java and the performance of Java for those things. And of course, some people in the Java world are going to disagree with me, and we'll see. Maybe there will be some interesting integrations there, some new projects. There are interesting projects for running models on Java, like inference servers on Java with Tornado VM and Llama 3 and JLlama. So there's definitely interesting projects out there. But I think especially on the data science parts, we'll see, but I don't necessarily see it at this time.
I also think it's that would be quite the challenge to solve, the puzzle to solve, to be honest.
Yeah.
Do you use AI on a daily basis? I mean, when I don't know, whatever you do, I mean, do you...
Yes. I don't use it all that much throughout the day, but I think once in a while, like I need some inspiration to write a little bit of text, and then I'm gonna modify it because I hate how it wrote it, but it does give me some interesting pointers in terms of generating code. It's really useful for kind of like, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was working on the Quarkus LangChain4j workshop, and there was this hard-coded kind of set of cars that we had for this fake car rental company. And I was like, well, it makes more sense to have that in a database. So can you change that hard-coded set of cars into an import SQL? And it was, for those kinds of things, I think it's fantastic because you have a very clear set of rules. And so then it changes that. At the same time, as like a code assistant for writing my code for bigger pieces of code, maybe not so much, because then I have to go back and massage it so much that in the end I probably would have written something myself faster and with less code, because it tends to be a little bit verbose sometimes. But it is definitely fascinating to see in what direction those code assistants are going, and they're very useful. For
do you have a opinion on hallucinations also? I mean, do you trust necessarily what the AI assistants give you, or do you by default say, I need to triple check it because...
Yeah, I'm quite critical on that because I see the code, and my first reaction is always like, oh wow, I didn't think of it that way. maybe it has a point. And then then I start really digging into it, and I'm like, no, that's actually, I would have written it in a much clearer way,
Right,
more
yeah.
concise way, and something that makes more sense to me, that's understandable. But that's maybe just me. I don't know.
I think it's not just you. I think there's, there is a sizable, I don't know, community out there with the same thoughts, kind of. We talked about Java, AI in general. What do you think is next for Quarkus then? I mean, is there any big next things you want to tackle?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways you can look at this. So I think in terms of strategy, let's say, of Quarkus, so we've now moved to IBM, and that has some interesting implications because IBM is really interested to push the Quarkus project forward and wants to invest more in Quarkus, sees this kind of as the future of Java within IBM, but by extension in the Java community as kind of the default stack. So it'll be interesting to see, but there's going to be more investments in Quarkus. Right now, we're of course in this big AI bubble, and so we're doing a lot in the AI space. But it's really interesting to see what's being accomplished right now, because the work on the LangChain for J project, which a lot of the Quarkus people are involved in that too. At first, it seemed a little bit gimmicky. It's just, we can communicate with the model. It's going to return some text. But now we're seeing this kind of evolution towards this agentic stuff, which again sounds a little bit like a bubble still. But there's some really interesting use cases by using AI where we want to use it, but being able to orchestrate it more to say, well, we have these workflows, these patterns that we're very used to of calling an agent that is able to do this kind of work and calling another agent that's specific for this kind of thing. And then we're able to orchestrate that by, sequence or parallel or in loops or with conditions, very much like any kind of programming that we're doing. But we're having that gives us a way to use AI agents for non-deterministic work that makes a lot of sense for some use cases, to interpret language that comes from our customers or from some things, or handle certain bits of information and reason about it, and then take a certain course of action to call deterministic tools. So all that stuff is really fascinating to me right now, and it makes it maybe a little bit less I don't know, a little bit less like it's just some fad that's going to pass, and a little bit more like, this could actually be something that's useful. But maybe I've been around this AI bubble too much.
Too long, yeah. You've now been bubbleized, yeah?
Yeah.
My personal issue is kind of that I feel, and it might also have to do with my job, but we've heard so much about AI, like in the past 1.5 or whatever, 2 years. It's been AI. And on Twitter, even 2 years ago, where people said we're all going to be jobless in a couple of months. And I just wish I had a kind of a fast forward button to see what in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, what these use cases we're just talking about, which are going to really stick out and just going to continue to be there, and get rid of all the other bubbly stuff around it.
Yeah,
so sometimes wish the fast forward button would be nice to have, kind of.
Yeah. It will be really interesting to see. So the tutorial that we just created, I think kind of gives a glimpse of where this could go. So we have, of course, it's a silly use case, but we have this fake car rental company, and basically the car gets returned, and somebody can put in a form saying the car, so there's cat hair in the back of the car and it crashed into a tree or something. And then we send that message, and we have our agent that's interpreting that message and determining what course of action needs to be taken. Does the car need to be sent just to car wash? Does it just need to be washed? Does it need to go to maintenance, or does it need to be disposed of? It's we can't have this car in our
Right.
in our inventory anymore. And so it's able to determine that based just on the text. And so using different agents, so we have the disposition agent, the car wash agent, we have the
disposition
agent. But they're able to then take action based on the recommendations from the first model that's saying, okay, based on this text, the car should be washed, but actually before it's washed, it needs to be repaired because it crashed into a tree. And it can try to maybe also have, a man in the middle kind of approach of, maybe we should ask more questions about how much damage there is because it crashed into a tree. That could mean many things, right? So we have all these different use cases, and that to me is fascinating because that's maybe something that could be applied in the real world, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Is that part of the workshop you were just talking about? I mean, can people check that out kind of as some...
Yeah. So we created the workshop. It's Quarkus.io, and I think it's Quarkus Workshop LangChain for J or Quarkus LangChain for J workshop. I don't remember which one it is, but...
People check it out and let us know if you're just disposing cars.
Yes. Yeah, let's see what these models are doing. But it's fascinating because you can plug in different models for the different agents and then see kind of the different behaviors of different models as well, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah. I need to find some time to check it out. As some sort of a last piece of advice, like an old man's advice to people. If you're already neck deep into Spring Boot or any other system for that matter, kind of, but you would like to try out Quarkus, is there any kind of like movie wisdom sentence where you just say, hey, this is a couple of, 1, 2, 3 tips and tricks or any sort of advice to get people to try out Quarkus and just play with it?
Yeah, I would say go to Quarkus.io. You'll find tutorials but try it out because I think a lot of people are a little bit hesitant because it's something new and I'm too busy doing what I'm doing, and I'll try it out some other time. It's really quick and easy to get started with, and then you'll see the live reload mode. You'll see the dev UI and just those kinds of features. Create a container with it, and then if you want to do that,
native image.
But yeah, you can get up and running with it like within a couple of minutes. It's very intuitive. If you're already a Java developer, there's nothing new in there. It's just that instead of the Spring specific annotations, you have the more general Jakarta EE specs and the MicroProfile specs. But there's also Spring compatibility extensions, so you can actually use like Spring Web annotations like REST controller by just using the Quarkus Spring Web extension, I think is what it is. Right. But there are a bunch of Spring compatibility extensions that mean that you can use whatever you're used to in the Spring world.
Right, I didn't know.
But use actually Quarkus.
I guess probably at some point it will break down, but I mean, I guess, so REST controller, I can just use it as is?
Yeah, you can just change your pom.xml to use the Quarkus extensions, and then you're good to go. Of course, at some points, you'll want to probably move over to the Quarkus kind of the native annotations, but you can use the Spring stuff just out of the box. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So for people who are new to the show, I always try to end the show with a couple of rapid fire questions, which somehow have to do with the tech topic that we've talked about and the country that the person that I'm interviewing is from. Now, you're from Belgium originally. You've lived in Italy, in the USA, in Switzerland. So what I do is, because I couldn't come up with the stuff myself, I just asked ChatGPT, hey, we talked about Quarkus. I give you 5 countries or 4 countries. Give me some rapid fire questions. So here we go. We have a rapid fire question first on, they're actually categorized by the country you've lived in. Belgium. Belgium runs on beer and chocolate. Does Quarkus give Java developers that same sugar rush of performance?
Well, of course. Yes, if you use Quarkus, this is exactly it. It's like this rush of, especially if you come from the traditional Java world, it's like, whoa. Yes, it's just like beer and chocolate.
It's just like beer and chocolate together. Okay, right.
At the same time, no.
So Italy, if the other frameworks are Fiats, is Quarkus the Ferrari of frameworks? And do developers need a helmet to handle that supersonic speed that you're mentioning on the website?
That's a trick question because, Ferraris are really flashy, but there's maybe some concerns about how reliable they are, right? So I would say no. Quarkus is it's like the combination of the Ferrari with the reliability of the German cars. How about that?
Nicely put. Okay, right. Which actually brings us to Switzerland. So Switzerland is neutral, precise, all about watches. Would you say Quarkus keeps better time than the other web frameworks when it comes to startup speed?
Ooh, yes.
And a global mashup. So you've lived in Belgium, Italy, US, Switzerland. If each country's developers, and this is now a hard question to you. So if each country's developers had to describe Quarkus in one word, in one native word, what would they say? What is a Belgium word to describe Quarkus?
A skahu. As we would say in Antwerp.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's super good.
Super good. What would Italians say?
È molto figo.
È molto figo.
Yeah. It's really cool.
It's really cool. What do French Swiss people say? Because I know you live in the French-speaking part of Switzerland.
C'est nickel.
C'est nickel?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Also,
the same
it's
thing.
Really cool. Yeah.
And then we're going to end with the USA. Any American word?
I'm trying to think of what some of those new words are, but no, I'm going to go with the classic. It's far out, man.
It's far out, man. All right. Cool. Then, Kevin, thank you very much. We learned a ton about Quarkus. For folks out there, check it out. Let us know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions to Kevin still. By the way, which brings us to the last topic. The last topic is, as always, we're going to raffle some licenses. Raffling licenses means you'll have to answer a question that has to do with the guest. You have to come close to the perfect answer that the guest might have in mind. Kevin, do you have something in mind which you would like the audience to kind of have an answer for?
One thing that came to mind is maybe they can guess how many people have contributed to Quarkus.
Exactly. Over the entire lifetime, you'll need to figure it out. How many different individual unique contributors have contributed to Quarkus in the past 2019, we said, in the past 6 years. Whoever comes close to the real number, and it's not going to be 42, unfortunately, send us in the comments down below and we'll raffle some licenses. Again, thank you very much for being on the show, and I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.